For 28 days, 5 bodies remained inside a quiet mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, while their killer disappeared into America. The lights stayed on, the house stood silent, and from the outside, it looked like the family had simply gone away. But inside Breeze Knoll, a large Victorian mansion, one of America's most disturbing family crimes had already taken place. On November 9, 1971, John Emil List killed his wife, his mother, and his 3 children inside their own home. Then he vanished, leaving behind a scene so carefully arranged that discovery would be delayed for nearly a month. The horror of the John List case was not only the number of victims, but the calm planning behind the crime. This was not a stranger who entered the house, and it was not a random act of violence from outside the family. The killer was the husband, the father, the son, and the man everyone inside that house should have been able to trust. John List had been born in Bay City, Michigan, in 1925, and raised in a strict Lutheran household. From an early age, his life was shaped by discipline, religion, duty, and a deep fear of moral failure. After military service, he attended the University of Michigan, where he studied business administration and accounting. He was educated, organized, religious, and respectable, the kind of man who appeared safe to the world around him. By 1971, List was living in Westfield with his wife Helen, his mother Alma, and his children Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. Their home, Breeze Knoll, had 19 rooms and looked like a symbol of order, wealth, and suburban success. To neighbors, the List family seemed quiet, traditional, and deeply religious, though not especially warm or socially open. But behind the mansion walls, John List's life was falling apart in ways he was desperate to hide. He had lost his job, and according to later accounts, he concealed that failure from his family. Each morning, he left the house as if going to work, maintaining the illusion that nothing had changed. Instead of facing the collapse openly, List spent his days away from home, trapped between shame, fear, and control. Financial pressure was only part of the story, because List's religious beliefs also shaped his distorted reasoning. He feared humiliation, poverty, and what he believed was the moral corruption of the world around his family. In his own mind, he began to believe that death was somehow better than disgrace and spiritual danger. That belief became the explanation he would leave behind, and it made the case even more chilling. On the morning of November 9, 1971, the List household began like any ordinary school day. The children left for school, the mansion grew quiet, and John List began carrying out the plan he had formed. He killed his wife, Helen, inside the home where she should have been safe. He then killed his mother, Alma, in her upstairs living area of the mansion. As his children returned home later that day, List killed them too, one after another. Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. never had the chance to escape the danger waiting inside their own house. All 5 victims were gone, and the man responsible did not run in panic. Instead, List moved through the mansion with a disturbing sense of control and preparation. He placed the bodies of his wife and children in the ballroom, while his mother remained in her own living area. He cleaned parts of the scene, lowered the thermostat, and took steps to slow down discovery. He wrote letters, including a 5-page message to his pastor, explaining the crime through his twisted religious logic. In that letter, List claimed he had killed his family to save their souls from evil in the world. To investigators and prosecutors, that was not mercy, but a calculated attempt to justify 5 murders. List also created excuses that made it seem as if the family had simply left town. Mail and deliveries were stopped, school contacts were misled, and the ordinary rhythm of the household disappeared. For days, then weeks, Breeze Knoll stood silent while the truth remained hidden inside. Neighbors saw lights glowing inside the mansion, but at first, no one understood what had happened. In a time before cell phones, digital records, and home security cameras, List's delay tactics gave him a powerful head start. By the time police entered the house on December 7, 1971, nearly 28 days had passed. What they found inside shocked Westfield and turned the List family murders into a national true crime case. 5 members of one household were dead, and the only obvious suspect had disappeared. John List's car was later found at John F. Kennedy International Airport, creating the impression that he might have fled by plane. But whether that clue was real or staged, the most important fact was clear: John List was gone. He had stepped out of his old life and into the vast anonymity of pre-digital America. List did not look like a dangerous fugitive, he looked ordinary, quiet, useful, and forgettable. That ordinary appearance became his greatest disguise. Over time, John List began living under a new identity, Robert Peter Clark, often known simply as Bob Clark. Under that name, he found work in accounting and built a second life far from Westfield. He joined church communities again, keeping parts of his old personality while hiding the darkest truth of his past. In 1985, while still living under his false identity, he married a woman named Dolores Miller. She later said she did not know that the man she knew as Bob Clark was actually John List. For almost 18 years, he lived in plain sight while the families of his victims waited without closure. The case remained open, but every passing year made capture seem less likely. Then, in 1989, television changed everything. America's Most Wanted prepared to feature the John List case, but investigators faced one major problem. Nearly 2 decades had passed, and no one knew exactly what List would look like after so many years. Forensic artist Frank Bender created an age-progressed bust showing how John List might have aged. The bust included older facial features, glasses, and the kind of quiet expression that made the reconstruction unforgettable. When the case aired in May 1989, millions of viewers saw the story of the father who had vanished after killing his family. One viewer noticed a disturbing resemblance between the fugitive on television and a quiet man living in Virginia as Bob Clark. That tip gave investigators the break they had been waiting for. On June 1, 1989, John List was arrested in Virginia, ending nearly 18 years as a fugitive. At first, he denied being John List and insisted that he was Robert Clark. But fingerprints confirmed the truth, and the man who had hidden for almost 2 decades was finally exposed. List was extradited to New Jersey, where he faced 5 counts of first-degree murder. His defense focused on his mental state, but prosecutors pointed to the planning, the letters, the delayed discovery, and the long escape. To them, the evidence showed control, calculation, and a clear understanding of guilt. In 1990, John List was convicted on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms, making him ineligible for parole for nearly 125 years. The sentence meant that John List would never again live freely outside prison walls. But even a conviction could not restore Helen, Alma, Patricia, John Jr., or Frederick. The mansion where the killings happened was later destroyed by fire, but the case never disappeared from American criminal memory. What makes the List case so haunting is the contrast between appearance and reality. A quiet religious father, an educated accountant, and a respectable suburban home hid a crime almost impossible to imagine. John List did not vanish into darkness after the murders, he stepped into another ordinary life and hoped no one would look closely enough. For more real crime stories and forgotten cases, follow the channel.